I need to be clear about this from the start, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story, it's a memory that's been burned into me. This happened, every last word of it. The Waterford crystal champagne flute felt unnaturally heavy in my hand, its delicate stem cold against my skin. Across the starched white linen of the tabletop at Elara, my husband, Mark, raised his own glass, the soft, amber light of the Chicago restaurant glinting off the expensive watch I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. He beamed, a perfect, predatory smile, and declared to our two closest friends, to my next chapter, before I even realized he'd ripped the pen straight from my hand and signed his name on the first page. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The evening was supposed to be a celebration of us. A decade. 10 years of shared dreams, inside jokes, and the quiet, unassuming life we'd built in a charming Lincoln Park brownstone. 10 years of me, Elara, supporting his every ambition while nursing my own in the stolen hours between midnight and dawn. Mark was a senior marketing director at a major firm downtown, confident, charismatic, the kind of man who commanded a room by simply walking into it. I was a ghostwriter. I wrote memoirs for C-suite executives and heartfelt speeches for politicians who couldn't string two sentences together. My name was never on the cover, but my words were everywhere. It was a good living, but it was a life lived in the shadows of other people's success. My own dream, the novel I'd been secretly crafting for 5 years, was my one true thing. It was a dark, literary thriller called The Sterling Echo, and it was my soul poured onto 400 pages, saved in a password-protected folder on my laptop. That night at Elara, the air was thick with the scent of truffle and ambition. Our friends, Ben and Chloe, were fawning over Mark's recent promotion. "You're killing it, man," Ben said, clapping him on the shoulder. "What's next? Taking over the world?" Mark's smile widened. He reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was cold. "Funny you should ask. Elara and I have some personal news to share." My heart fluttered. For a dizzying second, I thought he was going to announce we were finally taking that trip to Italy we'd always talked about. Or maybe he'd finally read my manuscript and wanted to celebrate me, for once. He squeezed my hand, a gesture that looked loving to them but felt like a vice to me. "I've been working on a little project in my spare time," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, humble tone he reserved for his most manipulative moments. "It's been my passion, my secret obsession. And, well, I finally sent it out." Chloe leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Sent what out, Mark? Don't leave us hanging." He took a theatrical breath, looking directly at me. His eyes were dark, unreadable pools. "My novel. I signed with an agent a few months ago, and last week Penguin Random House made an offer." The sound in the room seemed to warp, the clinking of cutlery and distant chatter fading into a dull roar in my ears. Ben let out a low whistle. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Mark. You wrote a book? You're going to be a published author." I just stared at him. My brain was a frantic, chaotic scramble of denial. His novel? Mark didn't write. He didn't have the patience, the discipline. He hadn't written anything longer than a marketing brief in his life. He used to mock my little hobby, asking when I was going to give up my scribbling and focus on something real. "What's it called?" Ben asked, already pouring more champagne. Mark's gaze never left mine. It was a challenge. A dare. "It's called The Sterling Echo." The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, not shattering, but landing with a dull, heavy thud on the thick tablecloth, a small, golden puddle spreading like a stain. The name echoed in the silent cavern of my mind. My title. My story. The one I'd read passages of to him late at night, the one whose plot twists I had agonized over for years. The story of a disgraced architect who discovers a dark secret about a historic Chicago skyscraper. My protagonist's name was Julian Sterling. It was my baby. My soul. "Elara, honey, you're pale, Chloe said, her voice sounding distant. Are you okay? You must be in shock. This is incredible news. I looked at Mark, my voice a strangled whisper. Mark, what are you talking about? He chuckled, a smooth, practiced sound, and tightened his grip on my hand, digging his fingers into my skin. She's just overwhelmed, he said to our friends, never breaking eye contact with me. She's been my biggest supporter, my muse. I couldn't have done it without her. The words were a public tribute and a private threat. Play along, or I'll ruin you. The rest of the dinner was a blur of forced smiles and hollow congratulations. I felt like a spectator watching a play about my own life being butchered on stage. They talked about his genius, his hidden talents, the brilliance of his concept, my concept. Every word of praise was a hot poker against my skin. His mother, Eleanor, a woman who wore her condescension like a Chanel suit, had insisted on joining us for dessert. She'd always seen me as a temporary fixture, a passable but ultimately inadequate accessory for her perfect son. When she heard the news, she didn't even feign surprise. She simply placed a perfectly manicured hand on Mark's arm and said, I always knew you had a masterpiece in you, darling. Some people are born to create, and others are born to assist. She gave me a pointed, dismissive smile. It was a perfectly executed assassination, delivered with the politeness of a request to pass the sugar. That night, back in the sterile silence of our brownstone, the facade shattered. As soon as the door closed, I rounded on him. How could you? The sterling echo? That's my book, Mark. That's my work. He took off his jacket, draping it carefully over a chair, his movements maddeningly calm. Elara, you're being hysterical. We've talked about this story for years. It was a collaborative idea. You had some rough notes, I fleshed it out. I made it real. You're a ghostwriter. You write other people's stories. You were never meant to have one of your own. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Mark became a local literary star overnight. An article came out in the Chicago Tribune, complete with a handsome photo of him looking pensive in his study, my office, titled Marketing Guru by Day, Master Storyteller by Night. He talked about his inspiration, how the idea for an architect protagonist came to him while walking past the Rookery building. He described his writing process, waking up at 5 a.m. to write before work, my routine. He was performing my life, and the world was giving him a standing ovation. Our friends rallied around him. When I tried to tell Chloe what he'd done, her expression shifted from sympathy to pity. Ellie, she said softly, grief and jealousy can make people see things that aren't there. Mark is soaring right now. It's natural to feel a little left behind. Maybe you should talk to someone. She was siding with the success story, the tangible proof of victory. I was just the bitter wife. His family, led by the venomous matriarch Eleanor, treated me with open contempt. At a family brunch, Eleanor cornered me by the mimosa bar. You must be so proud, she said, her smile as sharp as broken glass. But you must also be careful. A man like Mark, on a trajectory like this, he needs a partner who can keep up, not one who clings to his coattails with these strange, jealous fantasies. I was being gaslit by my entire world. Every day, Mark would leave little clippings of his interviews on the kitchen counter. He'd talk about his upcoming book tour, his meetings with film scouts from Los Angeles. He was building a fortress of success around himself, and with every brick he laid, I became more invisible. I was living in a nightmare of my own creation, haunted by my own words coming from his mouth. My own work suffered. I couldn't write. The words felt foreign, tainted. How could I build worlds for other people when my own had been so thoroughly plundered? I lost 2 major clients because I missed deadlines, my mind a fog of impotent rage and despair. I was trapped in the beautiful brownstone that now felt like a prison, surrounded by the life he had paid for with my soul. The suspicion phase was short-lived, I knew with absolute certainty what he'd done. The discovery phase, however, became an obsession. I knew he had deleted the file from my laptop, but I'm meticulous. I'm a writer. We live in fear of losing our work. For years, I had backed up my entire system to a series of external hard drives. I kept them in a fireproof safe in the basement, a place Mark never went because it was damp and full of spiders. One night, while he was out at a publishing dinner, I went down to the cold, musty basement. The air was thick with the smell of earth and forgotten things. My hands trembled as I worked the combination on the safe. Inside, nestled amongst old tax documents and my parents' wedding album, was a stack of 5 black Seagate drives. I grabbed the one labeled Archive 2020 to 2022, the period when I'd finished the final draft of the Sterling Echo. Back in my office, I plugged it into my laptop. My heart hammered against my ribs as the drive whirred to life. I clicked through the folders, my breath catching in my throat. Backup documents writing on my soul. And there it was. The _Sterling_Echo_final.docs, the file properties showed the creation date, October 17, 2021. Last modified, January 12, 2022. It was the smoking gun. A digital timestamp that proved my story existed long before he claimed to have written it. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. It was quickly followed by a cold, hard clarity. This file was my proof, but proof was not power. Not yet. Mark was backed by a corporate behemoth. Penguin Random House had teams of lawyers who could bury me, paint me as a liar, and drain my life savings in legal fees. A timestamped file was a good start, but it wasn't enough to fight a god. He was untouchable, a celebrated author in waiting, shielded by money, influence, and public adoration. He had all the power. And as I sat there, staring at the screen in the silent house, I realized a simple, terrifying truth: to beat him, I couldn't just reclaim my story. I had to write a better one. The turning point didn't come with a crash of thunder or a cinematic epiphany. It arrived quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon, in the form of a crisp, white envelope slid under my office door. It was from Mark's lawyer. Divorce papers. I sat on the floor, the documents spread out around me like a fan of tarot cards predicting my doom. He was leaving me. And he was being generous, the papers said. So generous. He wouldn't contest my keeping the brownstone, provided I assumed the remainder of the mortgage myself, a mortgage I couldn't possibly afford now that my own income had dwindled to nothing. He was offering a one-time alimony payment that was insulting, a figure that amounted to less than the advance he'd likely received for my book. The terms were designed to break me, to leave me financially crippled and desperate, a scorned, penniless woman no one would ever believe. The final page was a proposed NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, forbidding me from ever speaking publicly about him or his work. He wasn't just stealing my past, he was trying to buy my future silence. I read that clause 3 times. Forbid me from speaking. He wanted to erase me completely. Something inside me, a core of resilience I thought had been eroded to dust, began to glow with a hot, white rage. I thought of his smug smile at the restaurant. I thought of his mother's cutting words. I thought of him standing in the doorway, telling me I was never meant to have a story of my own. That was it. That was the moment the victim died and the warrior was born. I looked from the divorce papers to the external hard drive still connected to my laptop. He thought my book was the prize. He was wrong. My book was just the beginning. The real story wasn't about a fictional architect in Chicago. The real story was about a celebrated author who was a fraud, a manipulator, a thief. And I was the only one who could write it. My resolve hardened from a liquid fury into something solid and sharp. I wouldn't just fight for credit for the Sterling Echo. That was his battlefield, his terms. I would. Sarah listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. The digital timestamp is good, she said, her voice calm and measured. But his lawyers will argue you could have manipulated the metadata. They'll say you wrote this after his announcement out of jealousy. It becomes a he said, she said. And right now, he's the one with the microphone and the $1 million publisher. My heart sank. So, there's nothing I can do? I didn't say that, she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. I said we can't win by playing his game. We don't challenge the fiction. We expose the facts. She tapped a finger on the divorce papers, on the NDA clause. This is his fear. He knows you have proof. This is a scare tactic. So, we gather more. We build a case so ironclad that by the time we reveal it, they won't have a choice but to surrender. Her plan was brilliant in its simplicity. We needed corroboration. I spent the next week digging through a decade of my digital life. I was looking for a ghost. My own ghost. I found her in an old email chain from 2021 with a woman named Maya, a fellow writer I'd been in a critique group with before it dissolved. We had exchanged chapters. I scrolled through the attachments, my breath catching as I saw the file, sterling_echo_ch1-5_ for Maya.docs. The email was dated November 2, 2021. It was independent, third-party proof. I tracked Maya down. She was living in Austin now, working as a university lecturer. I called her, my hands sweating. Maya, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I need a crazy favor. Do you remember a manuscript I sent you a few years ago? A thriller about an architect? There was a pause. The Sterling what's it? Yeah, of course. The one with the secret room in the Monadnock building. That was brilliant, Elara. Whatever happened with that? Tears of relief streamed down my face. It's a long story, Maya. But would you be willing to sign an affidavit stating that you read those chapters, from me, back in 2021? Hell yes, I would, she said, her voice full of sudden fire. Is someone trying to steal your work? While Sarah quietly collected the legal ammunition, I began my own offensive. I started a blog. An anonymous blog called The Ghost's Ledger. I didn't mention Mark or Penguin Random House. I just started writing essays about the hidden world of ghostwriting. I wrote about the ache of pouring your soul into a project that someone else would put their name on. I wrote about the subtle art of capturing another person's voice. And then, I started weaving in themes, phrases, and specific, obscure architectural details from the Sterling Echo. I was planting my flag, creating a public, time-stamped record of my voice and my ideas, hiding in plain sight. The blog started to get a small but dedicated following in the literary community. People were intrigued by the anonymous ghost. Meanwhile, I was writing. I poured every ounce of my pain, rage, and betrayal into the manuscript for Ghost in the Marriage. It was raw, honest, and brutal. I detailed our life together, his subtle dismissals of my work, the night of the dinner at Alinea, the discovery of the stolen file, the gaslighting from our friends and his family. I named names. I included transcripts of his interviews, juxtaposing his stolen words with my own original prose. It was a memoir, a legal document, and an act of war all in one. When it was done, I sent it to 5 of the most ambitious literary agents in New York City. 4 of them passed, too afraid of the legal battle it would provoke. But the 5th, a firecracker named Julia Diaz, called me the next day. I've never read anything like this, she said, her voice buzzing with energy. This isn't just a book. It's a news story. It's a cultural moment. Are you ready for the storm this is going to cause? I've been living in the storm for 6 months, I replied, my voice steady. I'm ready to be the lightning. Julia sent the manuscript out on a Friday. The following week was a whirlwind. The book went to auction. Editors were calling it the ultimate revenge memoir, a real-life Gone Girl. The bids climbed higher and higher. Finally, an offer came in from Macmillan, one of Penguin Random House's biggest competitors. They saw the potential. They were willing to fight. The offer was for a $150,000 advance. I was sitting in my lawyer's office when the call came. Julia told me the number, and I started to cry. Not tears of joy, but tears of catharsis. It was the first time in almost a year that I felt seen. That number wasn't just money. It was validation. It was belief. It was the first stone in the catapult I was about to launch at Mark's castle. The plan was set. Macmillan's legal team, working with Sarah, prepared for the fallout. We would announce my book deal in Publishers Weekly on the Monday before the Sterling Echo's official launch party, which was scheduled for that Friday at the Pritzker Pavilion. We were going to hijack his celebration and turn it into his public execution. The escalation was over. The war was about to reach its climax. I spent the week in a state of suspended animation, a strange calm before the detonation. I bought a dress for his launch party, a simple, elegant black sheath. A morning dress for the man I used to know, and a battle uniform for the woman I had become. The invitation had come weeks ago, a glossy, arrogant summons to witness his triumph. He had no idea he was inviting his own executioner. The Monday of launch week, the announcement dropped like a bomb. Publishers Weekly ran the exclusive, Macmillan acquires explosive memoir, Ghost in the Marriage, from debut author Elara Vance, chronicling allegations of literary theft against upcoming Penguin Random House novelist Mark Vance. The article hinted at indisputable evidence and a shocking betrayal at the heart of the literary world. The internet ignited. The small community following my Ghosts Ledger blog immediately connected the dots. The story was picked up by Vulture, then Slate, then the New York Times. The narrative Mark had so carefully controlled with Vance, these are extremely serious, and frankly, baseless allegations. We are prepared to defend our author and our investment vigorously. Sarah simply smiled and opened her briefcase. Let's dispense with the posturing, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. She laid out the first exhibit. This is a signed and notarized affidavit from Maya Singh, a creative writing lecturer at the University of Texas, confirming she read and critiqued the first 5 chapters of Elara's manuscript, The Sterling Echo, in November 2021. Mark flinched. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Exhibit B, Sarah continued, placing a stack of papers down. These are printouts from an anonymous blog, The Ghosts Ledger, started by my client 4 months ago. It contains numerous passages, thematic explorations, and character notes that are identical to those in the manuscript Mr. Vance claims to have written. All publicly time-stamped. She let that hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. She slid my old Seagate hard drive across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Thompson. And this, Sarah said, is a complete, 400-page final draft of the Sterling Echo, created by my client on October 17, 2021. We have already had a third-party forensic analyst verify the metadata. It is untampered. It predates your author's contract by over a year. And of course, we have the manuscript for Ghost in the Marriage, which details every step of this fraud and is set to be published in 6 months. It includes names, dates, and direct quotes. The discovery process for that lawsuit will be extensive. The room was silent. Mark stared at the hard drive as if it were a cobra poised to strike. His agent was whispering frantically into his phone. Thompson, the lawyer, looked at Mark, his expression turning from aggressive confidence to dawning horror. Mark, he said, his voice low and dangerous, is this true? Mark opened his mouth, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in our lives. He saw no mercy in mine. And then, Eleanor spoke. This is absurd, she snapped, her voice shaking with rage. This is a pathetic fantasy concocted by a scorned woman to ruin my son's moment of triumph. I finally spoke, my voice quiet but carrying across the vast room. Was it a fantasy, Eleanor, when you told me at the mimosa bar that some people are born to create and others are just born to assist? Or was that just your way of telling me you knew I was the assistant all along? The color drained from her face. She had been his accomplice, his silent co-conspirator in my erasure. That was it. The dam broke. The publisher's lawyers started speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Mark's agent stood up, threw his phone on the table, and said, I'm out. I can't represent a fraud. He walked out of the room without a backward glance. Mark finally broke. He slumped in his chair, put his head in his hands, and made a sound that was half sob, half choke. The payoff was swift and brutal. Within hours, Penguin Random House issued a statement. They were dropping Mark Vance and pulping every last copy of the Sterling Echo. The book tour was cancelled. The launch party was cancelled. His career, the one he had built on the scaffolding of my dreams, was over before it had even begun. The media storm was a Category 5 hurricane. He was publicly, professionally, and financially annihilated. He lost his book, his agent, his reputation, and, I later found out, his job. I didn't go to his cancelled launch party. Instead, I went back to Chicago, to the brownstone. I walked into my office, my real office now, and I started to write the final chapters of Ghost in the Marriage. The story was no longer just about the betrayal, it was about the reclamation. It was about the victory. The $150,000 advance sat in my bank account, a symbol of my independence, a war chest for my new life. The friends who had abandoned me sent awkward, fumbling texts of apology. I didn't reply. Eleanor disappeared from public life, utterly humiliated. Months later, I moved to a quiet street in Portland, Oregon. I bought a small craftsman house with a garden in the back. My book was in the final stages of editing, and my publisher, thrilled with the publicity, had already offered me a 2-book deal for my next works of fiction. They even bought the rights to the Sterling Echo, which would be published next fall, under my name. One rainy afternoon, I was walking downtown and passed Powell's Books. In the window, there was a large poster advertising the most anticipated non-fiction of the upcoming season. It was the cover of my book. My name, Elara Vance, was printed in bold, stark letters under the title. I stood there for a long time, the rain soaking my hair, just looking at it. The victory wasn't the money, or the fame, or even his downfall. It was seeing my name, in print, on a story that was undeniably mine. He had tried to make me a ghost in my own life. He stole my words, so I wrote his ending. The end.